had broken away from the crowd soon after leaving Sylph. Cohen was now hiding behind a few bushes in the street across from it, the large building. Leaning against a tree near the sidewalk while practically inside of the bushes, just enough so that he was out of plain sight, the man who had asked the female tour guide earlier if crazy people infiltrating Sylph Company happened often was looking down at the camera he had carried with him throughout the tour. Wearing standard, inconspicuous, touristy vacation clothes, the black glasses-wearing man smirked as he looked over the camera in his hands. A camera which at first glance seemed innocent enough and like any other photographic device, but upon closer inspection was shown to be much more advanced and sinister in design than what it appeared to be. With several strange buttons, switches and other odd knobs on its surface, the device had a somewhat sizable screen in the middle of it that was currently showing what appeared to be a see-through, X-ray scan of the entire Sylph building. Hallways, stairwells, upper floors which had never been visited by the tour group, offices and many other intimately private areas of the building were all being displayed upon the faux camera as the man cycled between images. Continuing to smirk smugly to himself that his sonar-enabled reconnaissance camera had done its job well, the mysterious man pressed a hand to the almost invisible earpiece within his ear and spoke with a disciplined voice into it. "This is Operative 147 checking in with headquarters. My mission was a success. General outlined schematics of Sylph Company collected and ready for interpretation. Requesting permission to return to base." A female voice replied back in crystal clear frequency over the comm system. "Request granted 147, your job is now complete and you may return to HQ. Over and out." Stowing the camera back around his neck again, the mysterious man stepped back onto the sidewalk and began leisurely walking away with his hands in his pockets. Chuckling darkly to himself as he imagined that Sylph Company would soon fall into their hands along with all of their top-secret devices, the man blended like a Kecleon into the crowd of people around him and became lost in the concrete jungle known as Saffron City moments later. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Standing in the middle of a grassy field within the Saffron Community Park, Giselle and Misty were currently faced off side by side against the rich, snobbish girls some ways across from them that had made such a show of insulting and belittling the two of them. Preparing for their upcoming 2-on-2 Pokémon battle against the blonde girl whom they assumed was the leader of her little clique along with the brunette girl that was apparently her closest supporter, Misty and Giselle scowled as the former girl spoke in a voice dripping with conceited overconfidence. "Are you sure you two peasants want to go through with this? I really don't want to ruin your pathetic senses of self-worth any more than it already is." Misty fired back heatedly, "You done running your mouth or are we gonna battle already?" She flipped her hair and flicked one of her finely manicured hands. "Fine, have it your way." Pulling a Pokeball out from a necklace she had tucked underneath of her shirt, the blonde prima donna looked over at her brunette lackey of a friend and said in a commanding voice, "Come on Donna." The brunette jumped to attention and nodded immediately as she coincidentally pulled out a Pokeball from a necklace that she also wore under her shirt. "Why yes Angela." At the same time, both girls threw their Pokeballs out and in a burst of light came a Wigglytuff and a Clefable whom announced their names proudly, Wigwig, Cleffa, Clefable. Giselle gritted her teeth as she saw the normal and fairy-type Pokémon materialize on the field at the same time as Misty silently cursed. "How much do you wanna bet those two know how to use Sing?" Misty looked over at her and rolled her eyes. "Duh. It's all but their signature move each and they're fully evolved, of course they know it." Giselle glared at who would be her partner for the upcoming battle and replied under her breath as she pulled out her selected Pokémon, "Don't gotta be smart about it." She then tossed out the Pokeball she grabbed while shouting, "Go Graveler." As Giselle's Pokémon appeared, Misty chose her own Pokémon and yelled, "Starmie, let's go." As her own water type bursted forth from its ball and landed next to its polar type opposite in a bright glow of light. With both sides of Pokémon now on the field, the battle quickly began with Misty yelling, "Starmie, use water gun on Wigglytuff." "Star," was the instant reply of the star-shaped Pokémon as it sent a burst of water from one of the points on its body that rocketed straight at the normal type across from them. However, the brunette girl known as Donna came to her leader's immediate defense. "Clefable, use Metronome." With those words, the Pokémon that had only recently been reclassified as a fairy type jumped in front of its partner and began waving its fingers back and forth. As it did, a bright glow suffused its fingertips that caused a light screen to spring up in front of them and stop the blast of water dead in its tracks. Giselle wasn't idle either, as she decided to capitalize on the moment by ordering Graveler use rollout. Her Pokémon called out its name and then tucked into a tight ball before taking off, rolling as fast as it could towards Wigglytuff and Jigglypuff. Unfortunately for Misty and Giselle, however, it seemed that both girls knew how to work as a team because Angela was quick to counter. Wigglytuff picked Clefairy up and used Bounce to get away. Wiggly, her Pokémon voiced in assent as it picked up its partner and vaulted high into the air. At the same time, Donna commanded Clefable to use Metronome just as Graveler passed underneath of them. Waving her fingers again, to Misty's surprise and Giselle's dread, a powerful spurt of water shot out of Clefable's mouth by whatever misfortune of luck that collided with Graveler down below and pushed it back several feet. The only thing keeping it from becoming more damaged than it was being the type disadvantage training that Giselle put it through every day on the recommendation of Ash. With Graveler temporarily stunned out of its roll, Wigglytuff descended at it fast just as Clefable jumped from its arms, allowing the normal Pokémon to complete Bounce as it smashed its feet into Graveler and sent it flying back across the field. Clefable came out of its dive in the air and turned said dive into a hurtling headbutt which it used to smash its cranium into Starmie's gem-encrusted center. A grunt of pain escaping the water type as it spun across the field and slammed into Graveler, both of them coming to a stop in a heap. "Hey, watch your Starmie already, Misty." Giselle chastised the other girl as she glared at her. Misty returned the glare as she fired back, "It wasn't my fault, you priss. Or should I be able to just magically control where my Pokémon lands after it gets hit?" Before Giselle could fire off a retort, Angela and Donna took advantage of their moment of distraction and pushed forward. Wigglytuff, Clefable, use Sing, they both called out at the exact same time. Just before they could start singing, Misty and Giselle attempted to stop the potentially disastrous song of unavoidable sleep-inducing melodies. Graveler use Rock Throw, Starmie use Swift. The two girls shouted in close tandem. Graveler, whom was still slightly dazed from the hit it had endured from Wigglytuff, reached into the ground and pulled a chunk of earth free which it hefted up into the air. However, due to its daze, Graveler stumbled a little, and when it did, it ended up right in the path of Starmie. Whom was behind it? All at the same time, Misty's Pokémon released its barrage of Swift Stars which, instead of hitting their opponents, accidentally slammed into Graveler's backside and caused it to cry out and send the rock it was holding flying. To Starmie's own misfortune though, the chunk of earth came soaring straight back at it and slammed into the water type, knocking it backwards once again at the same time as Graveler fell to one knee after enduring so many hits from Swift. Almost immediately, Giselle and Misty rounded on one another and pointed at each other at the same time. "That was your fault." "No, it wasn't." "Yes, it was." Giselle glowered. "If your Starmie would have watched where it was aiming, then none of that would have happened." Misty growled. "And if your Graveler wouldn't have stepped back into Starmie's aim, then it wouldn't have gotten hit. It was your fault." Due to both girls now arguing amongst themselves and even Graveler and Starmie seemingly having a stare off at one another for accidentally attacking the other, given especially that both of them already didn't have a very nice history together as it was, they were prime targets as Wigglytuff and Clefable began singing. Misty and Giselle heard this, but before they could do anything to even hope to stop it, the dual songs took instant effect as Graveler and Starmie wobbled around slightly and then collapsed to the ground moments later, completely fast asleep and showing no signs of movement whatsoever. As Misty and Giselle stared at their Pokémon with obvious shock and dread on their faces, knowing what it meant, Angela laughed. "Wow, we don't even need to battle you two. You're doing a fine job of beating each other yourselves." The other girls behind Angela and Donna laughed as Misty and Giselle gritted their teeth but said nothing. Both girls knowing that right now, it was impossible for them to do anything to help out their Pokémon. A fact Angela and Donna took advantage of as they commanded at the same time, Wigglytuff, Clefable. Use Double Slap, Meteor Mash. Wigglytuff and Clefable both acted simultaneously and took off running at their now fast asleep opponents. Angela's Pokémon arrived first at Graveler and began rapidly slapping it across the face as Clefable flew at Starmie with its arm cocked back. To Misty's utter chagrin, the fairy-type's fist glowed a silverish-white color just before impacting with the water-type in a burst of multicolored stars, the attack sending Starmie careening back across the ground in a nasty skid. Clefable then followed its attack up with a headbutt which knocked Starmie skyward just as Wigglytuff reared a glowing fist back and then slammed it into Graveler's sleeping body with a powerful mega punch. The rock-type grunting in pain while still out cold as it flew into the air and collided with Starmie, both Pokémon falling back to the ground and landing in another heap atop one another. Graveler, Starmie. Misty and Giselle yelled together at the sight of their battered and fast asleep Pokémon lying flat on the ground. Angela and Donna just laughed as the latter taunted, "I was hoping that for Hicks they would at least put up some kind of a challenge because of all the Pokémon crap they probably shovel every day at their nasty little farm, but I guess not." Angela smirked and put one hand on her hip while she pointed with the other. "I agree, now let's put an end to this so we go and hit the West End outlets before they close up." At the same time as she said this, Donna nodded with a nasty smile and then commanded her Clefable to use metronome again, of which resulted in a powerful blast of water to shoot from its mouth again by whatever random chance, while Angela ordered her own Pokémon to use Stomp. Misty and Giselle could only watch in trepidation and desperation as the final attacks that would surely put their Pokémon out for the count came hurtling at them. Both rich girls were grinning smugly all the while just as Giselle cried out, "Graveler, please wake up." Suddenly, right at the moment's approaching end of no return, her cry awoke Graveler, who slowly opened its eyes to see the sight of Wigglytuff coming at it through the air with its foot pointed downward for a fierce stomp attack. As soon as it spotted this, Graveler's eyes shot open fully and it used all of its might to leap up and dig its hands into the ground. Before Wigglytuff or anyone else could think to make a reaction, the rock-type juggernaut ripped a huge piece of earth out of the ground which it swung in a sideways motion and slammed into the descending normal type. A loud shriek of pain escaping Wigglytuff after the hit, it flew back from where it had come from as the blast of water neared the still unconscious Starmie. Eyes widening since it knew that even a water-type move could potentially put Starmie out of commission right now, Graveler moved as quickly as it could and shielded the downed water Pokémon with its back turned away and arms out while facing Starmie. At the same moment, the torrent of aquatic power impacted with Graveler and caused the Pokémon to grunt and begin convulsing in pain due to the extreme effectiveness of the move. While Misty gaped at how Giselle's Pokémon jumped to the defense of her own and the brunette herself encouraged Graveler on, Starmie slowly came to again and awoke to the sight of its battling partner standing over it while taking the attack that was meant for it. In a true state of surprise that didn't show on its faceless body, Starmie watched as Graveler shook and grunted in pain but refused to move and allow the attack to get them both at the same time. Its desire to protect Starmie making it endure immense pain without a thought for itself. Feeling a new resolve to fight and not to mention a newfound respect for the Pokémon that had once defeated it, Starmie shot up and then, unbidden, shot around Graveler and sped towards Clefable like a wildly spinning disc. With Wigglytuff still dazed from Graveler's earlier counterattack and Clefable not expecting it be up and fighting again, Starmie closed in on the fairy type in mere seconds and slammed into its side with the pointy edges of its body. Clefable faltered back while crying in pain as Starmie jumped away and then shot off a barrage of swift stars at it, which sent Clefable hurtling towards Wigglytuff as it let out another cry of pain. Spinning backwards, Starmie landed next to Graveler and looked down at the kneeling, panting Pokémon. Offering a simple dip of its body in a show of respect and thanks, Graveler gave a thumbs up and pained wink in return while nodding itself. Giselle and Misty shared a glance in that moment and, after seeing their Pokémon work to defend each other when the other was in danger, realized that if they could put their differences aside in order to fight together, there was no reason why they couldn't either. Smiling at each other, the two girls gave one another a nod and then looked back at their Pokémon. "Let's show these prissy little bitches just who they're messing with," Misty yelled with fire alight in her voice again. Giselle nodded and smirked. "For once I totally agree with you, Misty." Together, they then commanded their Pokémon in total sync, Graveler, Starmie. Use Rock Slide, Bubble Beam. In equal unison, Graveler and Starmie unleashed their attacks. Stomping on the ground, Giselle's Pokémon caused many large rocks to shoot up around it which it then began kicking, punching and launching at Wigglytuff and Clefable. Starmie also began releasing dozens of fast bubbles which joined the hurtling projectiles of earth and began circling and rotating in and out, around them and behind them. Feeling panicky, Angela called out, "Wigglytuff, use Double Slap to break those rocks." She then looked over at Donna and demanded, "What are you standing there for? Help me." The brunette shot to attention and nodded meekly before yelling to her own Pokémon, Clefable use metronome. As the fairy type began waving its fingers, a ball of fire formed in its mouth signaling the impending release of some kind of fire-type attack. However, Misty was having none of that. Encountered with Starmie use water gun on Clefable. Starmie didn't waste a tick and grunted its name before shooting a fast stream of water straight at Clefable, which passed through the flying rocks and bubbles unimpeded and struck its target head-on. The force of the blast spinning Clefable around, the dazed fairy Pokémon faced Wigglytuff just as it released the blast of fire it had been holding back. Now directly in the line of fire due to its partner's fouled-up aim, Wigglytuff took the brunt of the attack and fell backwards off balance just as several rocks and bubbles pelted it all at once and launched it off of its feet with a cry of pain. Clefable was in no better condition than Wigglytuff either, as it endured the same brutality as its teammate, which caused it to get launched across the field like a rock being slung from a plastic-band slingshot. As Donna shrieked and covered her mouth, Angela whipped around and glared at her. "What the hell was that, Donna? Your stupid Clefable attacked my Wigglytuff." The brunette cowered back and began stuttering, I'm sorry Angela, I didn't mean for it to, I swear." Wigglytuff just got in the way and, while the two girls began arguing amongst themselves, their teamwork spectacularly falling apart all the while, Giselle smirked and looked over at Misty. "And they said our teamwork sucked." The redhead smiled and looked back at the battle occurring presently. "Should we put them out of their misery now?" Giselle turned and pointed at Graveler. "You said it, Misty, together. Graveler use rollout." Misty followed it up with, Starmie cover Graveler. As Graveler took off rolling as fast as it could towards their opponents, Starmie spun through the air behind it and, on Misty's command, began using Swift at the same time, which began hailing down upon Wigglytuff and Clefable. Covering their heads and crying in fear, Angela and Donna only just heard their Pokémon and turned their attention back to the battle right as Graveler smashed into Wigglytuff and Starmie into Clefable. Both Pokémon flying back and landing near their trainer's feet, Angela and Donna looked up to see Graveler and Starmie standing side by side just as Misty and Giselle pointed at them and yelled out, "Graveler, Starmie. Finish it." Starmie launched a torrent of water and Graveler a large rock whose speed was only enhanced by the jet of water helping it along. Donna and Angela went wide-eyed in fear and gripped onto each other, screaming loudly just as the attacks collided with their Pokémon and caused a large smoke cloud to shoot up into the air. Several moments later, after the smoke cleared, Wigglytuff and Clefable were shown to be lying atop each other on the ground completely unconscious. Falling to their knees, Angela and Donna began crying like the spoiled brats they were as Misty and Giselle cheered and ran up to their Pokémon. "Starmie, you were incredible," Misty praised as she hugged her Pokémon. "Graveler, I'm so proud of you and you did such a great job defending Starmie earlier too," Giselle spoke softly as she patted her own Pokémon on the back gently. Both of the Pokémon merely shared a glance with one another and nodded once more in mutual respect to the other before turning their attention back to their trainers. Turning and facing the other girls afterwards, Giselle crossed her arms as Misty put hers onto her hips and grinned. "So which one of you girls is next?" Obviously terrified at the thought of battling either one of them, Donna and Angela's friends turned and shrieked as they began running away. The two aforementioned young ladies appeared equally as intimidated now by Misty and Giselle and quickly returned their Pokémon before taking off after them. "Hey, wait for us. Don't leave us here with them," Angela screamed as Donna disappeared over the crest of the hill without so much as a single glance back. Giselle shook her head in amusement as Misty shouted after them, "Yeah, you better run. And think next time before you act like major bitches to someone on the street." Looking back at Giselle, they both smiled at one another and giggled before clapping their hands together in a high five and cheering, "Yeah." On the way back to the Pokémon Center after returning their Pokémon, Misty and Giselle were walking along in a comfortable silence, which was eventually broken by the redhead looking over at the brunette and saying hesitantly, "Hey Giselle, I just wanted to say thanks for sticking up for me earlier today when we first ran into those girls. I really appreciated it and I'm sorry if I was a little complicated to get along with at first during the battle." Giselle looked over at the younger girl and smiled. "No worries, Misty, those girls were total snobs and reminded me of myself before I started traveling with you guys. I was only too happy to put them in their place and I gotta say, we work well together." Misty returned the smile and nodded. Yeah, I guess we do. Nothing else was said after that all the way back to the Pokémon Center, but both girls knew there was really no point. Their battle together had spoken more than either of them could themselves, and even though they knew that they had many differences that set them apart, sometimes it was polar opposites that made the best friends. Even when they returned to the center and were questioned by Ash and Brock on how their day was down in the lobby over dinner, the two of them merely shared a glance that showed equal respect for the other before smiling slightly and turning back to the boys with a simple shrug. Answering in perfect unison at the exact same time, "It was okay. You." As the two young men began animatedly telling the tale of their humorous experience concerning the naked man in Sylph Company, Misty and Giselle listened on with fascination and humor while occasionally sharing a glance which easily translated the newfound respect and perhaps even budding friendship that was forming between them. All in all, it was a good end to a very interesting day that none of them would soon forget. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Saffron City Pokémon Contest Hall the next day alongside Ash, Brock and Giselle. It was the day of the contest and the city was abuzz with excitement and streets full as people came far and wide to witness the beautiful and awe-inspiring performances that were sure to take place inside the doors of the contest hall in just a short amount of time. Even though the building itself was situated outside of the city in the middle of the countryside which shared a nice view of Saffron City, the entire town was still bustling like crazy as people hustled and rushed to either get a bus or walk on foot to the masterfully architected performance hall, of which rested on the edge of a river which only added to its enrapturing eye appeal. Having gotten up early together and did their morning training with their Pokémon, Ash, Misty and Giselle had come downstairs from taking a shower after an exhausting workout in the center's gym that morning to find that Brock had already prepared everyone's food so they could leave and make it to Soledad's contest without being late. Now, as the four friends stood near the main doors of the contest hall and looked up at the large building in awe, they were all exceedingly glad for Brock's earlier forethought and could only think of one word to say in reply to Misty's statement. No kidding. Giselle, Brock and Ash all said at once while taking in the many people walking around who were not only heading into the building but also stopping by the several souvenir, food and game vendors that were set up alongside the concert walkway that led up to the contest hall doors. It's too bad we don't have a way to get a hold of Soledad, Giselle observed as she looked around for any signs of the redhead. I'd like to talk to her before she goes on. Brock looked around as well and then shrugged. She's probably already backstage getting prepared. I'm sure we'll run into her after it's over. Well, come on guys, let's head inside and get our seats, Ash called back as he began walking towards the doors. As they entered the large lobby inside of the contest hall, Ash and the others looked around and saw people all throughout the lobby. Some standing, some sitting down in benches near windows and in chairs in the middle of the lobby, and many others still were up at what was apparently the administration counters. Walking around slowly and taking in the scenery around them, the group of four friends saw pictures hanging on the walls of Pokémon in various positions of what was most likely mid-performance poses, miscellaneous contest moments of varying subject matter and even singular photographs that seemed to depict the winning contestants of each contest along with their Pokémon. Making their way up to the counter nearest to them, Ash spoke politely to the lady manning it. "Excuse me miss, we're here for the contest." The woman looked at Ash and smiled. "Of course. The general admission price is 30 per person." Ash, Brock, Misty and Giselle each paid their own way and once collecting the fee, the lady pointed to a door near the counter. "Just head straight through that door and find whatever seats are available. The contest starts in 10 minutes, enjoy." Nodding in thanks to the woman, Ash and his friends went through the door and came out into a truly massive open arena area where several seats and bleachers were set up in front of a big stage that was situated right in the middle of the expansive hall. Moving around the crowded area, Ash and the others eventually found a few seats about halfway down from the top and bottom seating section they were in. Seats in which were facing the stage with a rather clear view of both it, well as the massive screen that was set into the wall above the stage itself. "Wow, this place is so packed," Misty stated disbelievingly as she looked around at all of the people in the hall. "That must be the judges down there, right?" Giselle asked as she pointed to 3 separate podiums set up in front of the stage where a man in a red suit with black and gray hair as well as a short, squinty-eyed, closely cut brown-haired man and Nurse Joy herself were sitting. Yeah, I think so, Ash answered. Those are probably the judges that Soledad told us about. Mr. Contesta and Mr. Sukizo if memory serves right, and most likely that's the Nurse Joy we dealt with at the center. She did disappear after all by the time we were done working out this morning. Brock was all but drooling as he leaned forward in his seat. I already love Pokémon contests simply because of the view. His eyes were focused on Nurse Joy and Misty and Giselle just sighed before, suddenly, the lights dimmed and a spotlight came on stage. Hey guys, it's starting, Ash announced as he leaned forward himself. All eyes were soon focused on the stage as a peppy-looking, slightly curly sandy blonde-haired woman emerged from a long hallway to the left of the stage, one of two, the other being on the right, and came running out onto it. Wearing a blue and white colored visor hat with a microphone in her ear, a blue sleeveless top and same colored shorts on her torso, light purple hosiery on her legs, white boot-type shoes on her feet and a pink sweatband on her right arm, the woman stopped in the middle of the stage and called out enthusiastically into the microphone. Hello everyone and welcome to this year's annual Saffron City Pokémon Contest. I'm your contest announcer Lillian and I am so excited for another incredible competition between the highly skilled coordinators who have come from all over the region to compete here today. Aren't you? The entire hall lit up with the cheers of the crowd as Lillian smiled and held her hands up. That's what I thought. Now before we begin, I would first like to take a moment to introduce our judges for today's performance. Gesturing to the red-suited man seated at the far right podium first, Lillian gave his identity away to all who were in question. Our first judge is none other than the creator of Pokémon contests himself and the chief of the Pokémon Activities Committee. Mr. Raul Contesta. Standing up, the older man turned and waved to the audience behind him. Thank you everyone for coming out today. I hope you are all looking forward to this as much as I am. Sitting back down, the spotlight was then focused on the shorter man beside of him as Lillian spoke again. And now, the chairman of the Pokémon fan club, give it up for Mr. Sukizo. The crowd cheered again as the squinty-eyed man turned around and waved while simply saying, remarkable. Before sitting back down once more. And now for someone most of you probably already know, Lillian said as she reared her arm back. I give you Saffron City's very own Nurse Joy. As she pointed at the pink-haired nurse and yet another eruption of cheers sounded off, Joy stood with her hands clasped in front of her and smiled cheerfully. Thank you all for such a warm welcome. I hope today is a safe, fun and enjoyable experience for everyone. With all of the judges announced and Misty holding Brock back so he didn't lunge over the seats in an attempt to get to Nurse Joy, Lillian held her hands up and winked. Now that all of the introductions are over, let me explain the rules of this contest before we begin. There will be 2 rounds to this Pokémon contest. The first is the appeal round where contestants will attempt to show off the beauty, grace, intelligence, poise and specialties of their Pokémon. Once all contestants are finished, the judges will decide who moves on and who gets eliminated and then that opens up into the battle round. In the battle round, contestants will face against each other with their Pokémon and attempt to defeat them in one of 3 ways. Either by knockout, whoever loses all of their points first or who has the most points remaining at the end of the time limit. The contestant who manages to come out on top at the end of the competition will take home. Lillian then held a beautiful pink ribbon out she had in her left hand. The gorgeous saffron contest ribbon. Putting the ribbon away, Lillian held her other hand up again. Now without any further ado, let's get this show on the road. The crowd applauded yet again as the first round of the Pokémon contest began in earnest. For the first several performances, Ash, Brock, Misty and Giselle were left in a state of awe and amazement at the truly wondrous, incredible and splendorous acts that were put on by the many participating Pokémon coordinators and their highly skilled partners. They saw a Crobat that moved like a blur who created several razor winds and then trapped them in a gust tornado that spun and twisted them around inside of its funnel like a twirling, dancing snow globe of deadly windy fury. They saw a Raticate with a pelt that seemed to shine who was capable of creating dozens of clones of itself using Double Team that it then had perform several athletic and acrobatic stunts, flips, spins and twirls like a one Pokémon circus routine. A Rapidash that was capable of using its incredible speed to run around the stage so fast it was able to make a giant flaming ring of fire that burned so brilliantly and brightly, some of the observers actually had to cover their eyes. One particular Sandslash had the amazing control over its sandstorm attack to where it was actually able to create several large twisters of sand which it then used to hop from one to the other in midair while making poses as it did so. And, surprisingly enough, there was even an Ivysaur which had learned how to use its ropes in perfect conjunction with its trainer to form a speed jump roping team that was performed in near-perfect, flawless synchronization. The two of them actually switching in and out between who controlled its two vines as they each performed impressive tricks and stunts and all without a third person to help control said vines. Needless to say, after watching so many amazing performances, Ash and his friends were truly in a state of total awe. "Man, this is so amazing," Misty said breathlessly as she sat back in her seat and smiled. "I mean, wow." Giselle was leaning forward in her seat with stars practically in her eyes. "Seeing this type of thing up close is beyond words. I love it." Ash looked over at Brock. "Soledad should be coming out soon, right, Brock?" The teen shrugged with his arms crossed. "Yeah, most likely, it's been quite a few people so far. She should be up soon." It was at that same moment that Lillian called out once more, "Next up is a veteran in the contest circuit. She's competed in the Johto and Hoenn region grand festivals and has even been in our own a time or two. She hails from Pewter City, please welcome Soledad." As the redhead herself came running out onto the stage waving at everyone, Ash and the others started cheering and calling out to her. "Soledad. Yeah, Soledad. Knock 'em dead, Soli. You got this, Soledad." Without breaking her stride, Soledad jumped into the air and threw a Pokeball up into the air as she called out with a voice full of confidence and strength, "Butterfree. Take the stage and show your shine." Out of the Pokeball, a bright burst of light that emitted gorgeous purple, blue and pink stars came shining forth which signaled the release of a blur of a blue and white. A blur so fast that some even had trouble keeping up with it. The speeding figure shot up into the air in a twirling, spinning motion, which had everyone watching in awe as it then rapidly descended to the ground with its wings furled in. However, just before it could hit the stage below, the object opened them again and flew forward into the crowd. Ducking, weaving, dodging and flying all throughout the mass of people before it rocketed towards the stage again and took to the ceiling once more. As it reached its destination, the figure stopped completely and flung its wings out to the sides, releasing a burst of bright silvery powder which drifted to the stage below and landed on Soledad's hair, making her already sleek and shiny red locks glisten with flecks of silver in it. As Soledad held her hands up in the air towards her Butterfree which was now hovering up in the air while sparkling as well, the crowd cheered loudly at the spectacular entry of the speedy bug type alone. Without giving any chance for reprieve or the crowd a chance to settle down, Soledad pointed and called out, "Butterfree, use Silver Wind into Stun Spore, Poison Powder and Sleep Powder." With a cry of, "Free!" the female Butterfree extended her wings out and then thrust them forward. As she did, a thin plume of shining, silverish powder came spreading outward across the open air in a fast motion. Shooting to the side, Butterfree flapped her wings together again which sent a purplish burst of poison powder at the silver one. She then repeated this action in two other directions until the yellow powder of Stun Spore and lighter orange powder of Sleep Powder had coalesced with that of Poison Powder and Silver Wind, effectively creating a large cloud of multi-colored powders that sparkled, glinted and shone under the lights of the ceiling above. "Would you look at that, folks?" Lillian exclaimed with an impressed air to her voice. "Butterfree has created a cloud of several different spore attacks that now resembles a shining rainbow of colors. Amazing." As the crowd watched on in awe, including Ash and his friends, Soledad called out again, "Now use Whirlwind, Butterfree." Backing up, Butterfree started beating her wings rapidly and created a large twister around the multicolored spore cloud that served to trap it inside of the funnel. However, instead of dispersing it, the cloud was so thick that it actually started spreading out into the twister until the entire funnel was alight with vibrant, shining colors of blues, purples, yellows, oranges and silvers. Before Lillian could even comment on the breathtaking spectacle, Soledad commanded again, "Now use Double Team and Agility, Butterfree. You know what to do." The flying bug type nodded to her trainer's words and then sped towards the funnel of violently spinning colors while creating several copies of herself that surrounded the twister. Then, just before she could hit it, Butterfree reared straight up above the twister as her clones all began flying into and out of the churning gust of wind. While the original Butterfree stayed hovering above the twister like the ringleader of a circus show, her doubles shot in and out of it like they were diving into a vertically ascending wall of water. Something that, to the crowd spectating, made it appear as though dozens of speedy little balls of blue were swimming inside of the almost prismatic funnel of wind. This is amazing, ladies and gentlemen," Lillian shouted into her mouthpiece again. "I've never seen so much going on at one time by one little Pokémon before. The colors in that whirlwind combined with all of the shapes flying inside of it are just incredible." Soledad smiled to herself before raising her hand and giving another command. "Butterfree, it's time for the finale. Use Gust." Rearing her entire body back, Butterfree thrust her wings forward with another cry of her name and launched a powerful gust of wind at the twister below which, upon impact, caused it to explode with a loud popping sound. As the funnel disappeared, the spores inside of it were released and shot up into the air, slowly drifting down to the stage while still in their combined state, which made it look like a rain of sparkling rainbow flecks had suddenly started falling from the heavens themselves. Surprisingly enough, most likely due to Soledad's training of Butterfree's control over its attacks, the shower of normally toxic spores only fell upon the stage instead of spreading outward into the crowd, of which Lillian and Soledad were quick to back away from temporarily as said spores continued to slowly fall to the stage while Butterfree herself stayed hovering up in the air. After the breathtaking spectacle finally ended, Butterfree hovered back down and landed on Soledad's outstretched arm, whom had since stepped back out onto the stage. Smiling and nodding to her Pokémon, Soledad faced the crowd again and then bowed along with her Pokémon as the entire hall exploded into uproarious applause. Fanfare which Soledad gracefully accepted as she waved humbly to the crowd and smiled genuinely. Among the cheering fans were Ash and the others, who were calling down loudly to Soledad. "That was incredible, Soledad. You rock, girl. Way to go, Soli, you were amazing. All right, Soledad and Butterfree. Way to shake the house." Being that they were close enough to the stage, Soledad was just able to hear their voices and looked their way, finally able to spot the group of four by seeing Ash's signature-colored jumpsuit and the Pikachu that was perched atop the railing in front of their seats. An even brighter smile stretching across her face, Soledad waved in their direction and pointed, letting the four young trainers know that she indeed saw them. Coming back out onto the stage, Lillian spoke back into her microphone as the loud applause finally died down somewhat. "Wow, everyone. Wasn't that just incredible? Let's hear what the judges have to say concerning that miraculous performance." Mr. Contesta was the first to go as he gave his assessment of the recent appeal into the microphone on his podium. "That was absolutely amazing. A true testament to what can be achieved if Coordinator and Pokémon work tirelessly to achieve their goals together. Never before have I seen such a breathtaking performance here at the Saffron City contest, and it was a real treat." Mr. Sukizo went next and merely gave an enthusiastic, "remarkable," before allowing Nurse Joy to give her own assessment. "I found Soledad and Butterfree's performance to be marvelous and beyond words. I for one do not have a single complaint concerning anything I saw." Facing the crowd again, Lillian called into her microphone once more, "Did you hear that, folks? Such high praise from our esteemed judges, now that's something to be proud of." She then looked at the judges' score panels. "Let's see what the judges will award our two contestants with now." A few moments passed by and then all three judges' podiums lit up on the front of them, which likewise showed up on the big screen behind the stage. "Will you look at that, everybody? Perfect 10s from all three judges." As the crowd applauded once more for Soledad, she gave another bow and wave, specifically to Ash and the others up in the stands, and then retreated off stage and into the hallway she had emerged from earlier with Butterfree still perched on her shoulder. Turning back to face the crowd, Lillian made a fist. "And that does it for the appeal round of this contest. We're going to take a short break and then start the battle round right after that, so make sure to be here and catch all of the action." As several people began getting up and leaving the hall to go stretch their legs and rest for the intermission, Ash leaned back in his seat and smiled as he shook his head. "Man, Pokémon contests are so freaking awesome." Misty smiled teasingly at him and joked, "You thinking about switching careers, Ash?" The raven-haired boy looked at her and shook his head. "No way, but I tell ya, I could definitely see myself getting into some contests one day. I mean, think about all the possibilities that it could open up if you mixed Pokémon Coordinator training and skills with normal Pokémon Trainer ones. It could really give you a huge leg up. Brock nodded and crossed his arms while replying to Ash's statement. I agree with you, Ash. Being a well-rounded trainer and coordinator together would really make you and your Pokémon a force to be reckoned with no matter who it was you battled. Giselle looked down at the stage and chimed in, yeah, but taking on both at once would be really taxing and extremely hard. You can tell these people train day and night with their Pokémon to get themselves prepared for these contests. Ash looked over at his girlfriend. Yeah, I agree, Giselle, and that's why I wouldn't even think about trying it until I had more time to grow as a Pokémon trainer and got a little more experience under my belt. But it sure would be cool, right, Pikachu? He asked his first Pokémon. Pikachu looked back at Ash from his place still perched on the railing and smiled and nodded. Pie, Pikachu, pie. Ash chuckled at his Pokémon's enthusiastic reply, which he figured probably meant yes, and then stood up. Well guys, I'm hungry for some peanuts that I saw at one of those outdoor vendors and need to stretch my legs. You guys coming? Brock, Misty and Giselle all stood up and followed Ash out of the hall and then spent the rest of the intermission break exploring the mini festival outside of the contest hall. Not coming back in and taking their seats again until almost a half an hour later when Lillian called over the intercom system that it was time to start the next round of the contest. Sitting next to Giselle this time around with a drink at his side and a bucket of popcorn that the two of them were sharing together, Ash turned his attention back to the stage eagerly. Pikachu was in his lap looking just as anxious while Giselle, Misty and Brock, whom were also chowing down on their own snacks, all seemed to share a similar vibe. Soon, Lillian came back out onto the stage and her voice sounded throughout the hall again. Okay everyone, break is now over. Are you ready for some Pokémon battling action? The crowd cheered loudly and she smiled. Alright, now without further ado, let's start the battle round. With those words spoken, the final round of the contest began in earnest. As coordinators and their Pokémon fought against one another valiantly in an attempt to survive each round and move on to the next one, Ash and his friends were treated to the spectacle of just how different contest battles were from regular battles. While contest adept Pokémon obviously didn't possess the same raw power, strength and brute force of their Pokémon gym battling brethren, they did show a level of grace, flamboyance and special skills that more than made up for it. Instead of merely going at one another as hard as they could in an attempt to thrash their opponent into the ground until they could no longer battle, contest-trained Pokémon showed that participating in these types of battles depended on much more than simply power and strength. A contest Pokémon had to possess the ability to think on their feet, control their movements almost perfectly and try to prevent their opponent from performing any movements too flashy while battling. They also had to move quickly and fight as smartly as they could since they only had 5 minutes on the clock to outdo each other. Each opponent had a rectangular bar of energy below their facial image, and every time that their Pokémon would either land a hit on one another, miss an attack, perform an overly flashy move or use their opponent's move against them, the circle of points would decrease. Whomever lost their points first, had the least amount by the end of the time limit or got KO, Ed would lose the battle. Ash, Brock, Misty and Giselle witnessed several impressive battles throughout the battle round. Seeing Pokémon that were able to make battling just as beautiful, graceful and captivating as the appeal round itself was. Most of the time, all the battles they witnessed would end by KO instead of the other two ways there were to lose, and this rung especially true with Soledad, whose Butterfree was just as much of an effective battler as she was performer. Even though Butterfree seemed just graceful and flashy, she had fierce speed and a surprising attack force on her side that left her opponents dizzy, confused and most of the time frustrated before she finally came in for the knockout. Watching Soledad and Butterfree battle, whom were practically perfectly in sync with another, Ash was able to deduce that they had a strategy that was perfectly formulated for the contest circuit. Instead of simply going all out and wasting all of their energy right out of the gate, the two of them would let their opponents attack as much as they wanted to while expending large amounts of stamina to knock Butterfree out of the air early in the battle. The strategy came into play concerning Butterfree's speed. Given that she was faster than all of her current opponents, she would simply fly around quickly and gracefully dodge all of her foes' attacks without so much as attaining a scratch, which proved to be extremely effective, as every time they would miss and fail to hit her, their ring of points would decrease. Then, once they were tired out and began to slow down, Soledad would have Butterfree move in on the offensive and take them down with usually one, or just a couple of merciless attacks. Even on the few times that Soledad and Butterfree's opponents would perform a flashy move that took some of their own points away, it would end up becoming a moot point when said attacks would always fail and result in their opponents losing just as much, or more points, than they themselves did. After watching 3 battles with Soledad and Butterfree, whom won each round without losing hardly any points and barely breaking a sweat, it was not hard to believe for Ash or any of his friends that she was moving on to the final round of the contest. A fact Giselle gave voice to as the final battle was about to take place. "I can't believe how good Soledad is. She's gonna win this no problem." "Yeah," Misty agreed readily. "This guy doesn't stand a chance." Ash looked down at the stage and then the large screen behind it that showed Soledad's picture on one side and then one of a brown-haired, green-eyed man on the other who was her opponent for the final match. "I don't know you two, I wouldn't be so sure yet." Giselle and Misty both looked at Ash and at the same time asked, "What do you mean?" However, it was Brock that answered while crossing his arms. "He's talking about the guy Soledad's going up against. He's shown a lot of skill and strength getting here and I think he can definitely offer her a challenge." The man Brock was talking about had been using an Arcanine throughout the battle round that possessed just as much speed as Soledad's Butterfree but also had tremendous offensive strength and power to back it up. Skills in which it and the Fire type's trainer had used to practically steamroll over the competition up to this point. If Soledad isn't careful and doesn't battle extremely smart here, she may just lose. Ash surmised while scanning the stage where Soledad and the brown-haired man were now standing and awaiting the announcement to begin with their Pokémon already out. Arcanine has way more brute strength and power than her Butterfree does, so it could be anyone's battle in my opinion. Giselle and Misty both turned their attention back to the stage just as Lillian came out and announced excitably, "Alright ladies and gentlemen. This is the final match of the battle round and our last event of this Pokémon contest. We have Soledad of Pewter City going up against Derek of Fuchsia City for the right to take home the Saffron Ribbon. If you guys are ready, then let's battle." With the announcement made, Lillian moved off the stage and shouted, "Start the timer and go." As the clock started ticking and the battle finally began. A fight in which the man known as Derek started off quickly as he commanded without any time for thought or pause, Arcanine used Quick Attack. With its body glowing a bright white, Arcanine shot off across the stage towards Butterfree. Soledad however wasn't about to be caught unawares and reacted quickly, Butterfree ascend. Just before she could receive the full impact of the Fire type's incoming attack, Butterfree spun up into the air to avoid it and just barely got clear as Arcanine passed below her. However, most likely so they wouldn't lose any points, Derek called out again, "Arcanine spin around and use Flamethrower." Jumping and spinning around on its front paws in midair, Arcanine did a total 360 feet and launched a jet of red-hot flames out of its mouth at Butterfree. Luckily, the female bug type was fast on her wings and used them to flap upwards, sending her down and out of the way of the blast of flames just as it passed over where she had been moments before. Derek's circle of points decreasing slightly due to the missed attack, he tried to compensate immediately by pressing forward again. Arcanine used Double Team and combined it with Flamethrower. As the four-legged fire type jumped back, several copies of itself suddenly phased into existence and took up a circular position above where Butterfree was hovering. Then, at the same time, they all released identical bursts of fire which roared up towards the flying bug Pokémon in a cylindrical, cone-like fashion. Even though Butterfree started dodging, weaving, turning and flying out of the way of the streams of fire with all haste, the crowd appeal of the combination move was enough to cause Soledad to lose points as her circle lost some of its yellow coloring and faded to black. Unfortunately for her, while Soledad couldn't really have her Pokémon perform any kind of counterattack while under such heavy fire, since any wind-based attacks would only make the flames themselves that much more powerful, Derek saw the perfect opportunity and he took it. Arcanine now use Quick Attack. As soon as those words left his lips, a blur of white energy came hurtling up at Butterfree out of nowhere. Still attempting to avoid all of the jets of fire that was coming at her from below, Butterfree was too little too late to see the real Arcanine that was now on a collision course with her. While the copies of Arcanine had been keeping her busy with Flamethrower down below, the real one had managed to get itself into a position far enough back without being seen that it had set itself up into perfect position for a surprise attack. An attack in which it was putting into play now as it smashed into Butterfree, eliciting a cry of pain from her as she fell to the ground below. At the same time, Arcanine landed on the ground neatly while all of the copies of itself vanished just as the fire type opened its mouth on Derek's command of Fire Spin and launched a circular vortex of flames at the descending Butterfree. Unable to help her still stunned Pokémon, Soledad shouted, "Butterfree!" Just as the flames consumed it and trapped the bug type within the blazing inferno of fire. The crowd watched in awe and some even in fear, like Ash and his friends, as Butterfree cried out in pain from inside the dome of fire. However, it wasn't over because just as the fire-based attack died down and the orange glow and heat it was giving off across the hall finally passed, Derek commanded again, Arcanine use takedown attack. Butterfree, whom was now badly burned and smoking, fell towards the ground limply just as Arcanine finished its brutal series of attacks by charging full speed at her and slamming into Soledad's Pokémon, sending her spiraling across the stage where she smashed into the ground and lay still a few short seconds later. Soledad's points dropped all the way down to just under a quarter thanks to the vicious onslaught while Ash and his friends all leaned forward and gripped onto the railing. "Butterfree!" They all shouted in unison as Soledad watched her Pokémon struggle on the ground. "Butterfree, you don't have to keep battling," Soledad yelled upon seeing her Pokémon attempting to get back up. "I don't want you to get hurt." However, when Butterfree turned her head and looked back at her trainer, Soledad saw a look in her big, round eyes that translated to the redhead everything she needed to know about her Pokémon's intentions for the battle itself. Recognizing what Butterfree was trying to relay through years of training and working together as a team, Soledad calmed herself and gave a barely noticeable smile before nodding. "Okay, old friend, I trust you." Lillian commentated in clear surprise as saw Butterfree get back up slowly. "Folks, this little Butterfree just won't stay down. I tell you, this announcer is impressed at the tenacity and determination I'm seeing out of this Pokémon right now. Incredible." Derek obviously thought the match was already over though as he smirked and called out while seeing they still had about 2 minutes left, "Arcanine, end this with takedown." The fire type howled to the air and then took off at blazing speeds towards the struggling Butterfree. A look of cold steel and barely contained excitement in its eyes for the match it was about to claim victory over. Everyone held their breath, even Ash and his friends, as what they felt was the end drew nearer and nearer. Soledad remained calm and impassive though, and just as Arcanine was upon her Pokémon, she finally revealed the reason for it. Raising her hand, Soledad shouted, "Butterfree, drop back and use Stun Spore." Just as Arcanine jumped at Butterfree, she fell backwards completely and let the fire type pass directly over top of her. Unfortunately for Derek and Arcanine though, there was far more to it than a simple evasion technique. As she fell back and Arcanine passed over her, Butterfree flapped her wings upward and released a cloud of Stun Spore directly into Arcanine's face. The move was instantly effective as the fire type curled in on itself in the jump and lost all grace, landing in a rough tumble and roll on the ground which cost Derek points. "What?" the brown-haired man shouted as his Pokémon slowly stood on wobbling legs and began shaking its head, sneezing and rubbing at its face with its paws in an effort to get the paralyzing powder off of it. Arcanine's moment of distraction gave Soledad all she needed to work with as the redhead yelled to her Pokémon, "Double team into quick attack." Butterfree did as Arcanine had done earlier and created several copies of herself which she then put to use as she and the many Butterfree duplicates took off at the now freaked out fire type while using quick attack, slamming into Arcanine from all different directions like miniature freight trains. In essence, Arcanine was like a ball being kicked around as all of the Butterfree smacked it back and forth between them while Lillian announced in stunned amazement, "Unbelievable. Butterfree has turned the tide in this battle and now has Arcanine on the ropes without showing any signs of letting up." To Derek's great misfortune, Soledad planned on doing far more than that because just as Arcanine was sent sprawling across the ground once more from one of the Butterfree's quick attacks, she commanded, "Butterfree, use Gust." The real Butterfree broke free from the others and whipped up a fierce gale of wind that swept Arcanine, whom was now almost completely immobilized, into its funnel and began whipping the poor fire type around in its vortex like a rag doll. To make matters worse, the copy Butterfree all flapped their wings and added to the growing twister until it was double the size and began emitting a loud, very noisy screeching noise that was almost as ear-splitting as it was fascinating to watch. Standing up, Ash leaned over the railing as far as he could and shouted while pumping his fist, "Yeah, Butterfree, do it. You rock." As if she heard him and was wanting to prove it, Butterfree flapped her wings forward hard one last time and dispelled the cyclone with another burst of wind that struck its base and stopped it cold. As the gust came to a sudden halt, Arcanine fell to the stage below and landed with a painful crash upon the hard ground. Looking upon its eyes, the swirls now surrounding them were a clear indicator that the fire type was out of the fight for good. A fact highlighted by the screen above changing to show just Soledad's face now upon it with confetti falling around her picture and the word, "Winner," lit up brightly just underneath of it. As Derek despondently returned his downed Pokémon and Soledad ran up to embrace her own, Lillian stepped out onto the stage again and cheered into microphone. "And that is it, everybody. Soledad and Butterfree are the winners of this Saffron City Pokémon contest. Everybody give them both a big round of applause." The entire hall erupted into loud clapping and cheering, joined of course by a standing Ash, Misty, Brock and Giselle, while Soledad and an exhausted Butterfree waved to the crowd gratefully. Clear joy and happiness present upon their faces as Soledad hugged her Pokémon once again and laughed joyfully. As her opponent left the stage with a congratulatory nod of his head, which she accepted, Lillian spoke once more while the three judges got up from their panels and joined them upon the stage. "And now everyone, Mr. Contesta will present the grand prize to our winner to commemorate the end of this Pokémon contest." The slightly middle-aged man walked up to Soledad and opened a small red box that was revealed to contain a beautiful pink ribbon with a gold medallion nestled upon soft cotton within the case. "Young miss, that truly was some impressive performances you and your Butterfree put on today, and I am very pleased to present you with the Saffron City ribbon. Congratulations." As Soledad took the ribbon in hand and nodded gratefully to Mr. Contesta, Sukizo simply gave a cheerful, "Remarkable," while Nurse Joy gave a kind smile and offered her own praise. "That was a fantastic match, Miss Soledad, and I wish you all the luck in the world going forward." Thanking the judges, Soledad then turned and showed her ribbon to Butterfree before facing the crowd and holding it up in the air. To which everyone cheered wildly at while Lillian shouted over the roar, "Thank you all for coming out today and I hope you had a great time. Travel home safely and please join us here for the next contest." Ash and his friends clapped, cheered and hollered for Soledad along with the rest of the crowd until gradually, the applause died down and everyone eventually began filing out of the contest hall. Following the masses, Ash and the others made their way out of the hall and re-entered the lobby while stretching their legs. "That was such an awesome experience," Giselle gushed with her hands stretched up in the air as she bounced up and down. "I know, and Soledad and Butterfree were so good," Misty agreed while stretching her back. "They were totally in sync with each other the whole time." Brock chuckled and rolled his neck. "Yeah, well, that'll happen when you travel and train with your Pokémon for as long as she has. Soli has some serious skill as a coordinator, I'll give her that." "Aw, thanks little bro, that means so much to me," Soledad herself responded teasingly as they all turned around and saw the redhead walking their way with a smile on her face. "Soledad," Giselle exclaimed happily as she and the others went up to her. "That was incredible. The entire performance, I mean, just wow. I've never seen battling done so beautifully and gracefully before," Misty added from beside of Brock. "You really earned that ribbon." Soledad just smiled modestly and held her hands up. "I appreciate the sentiments, girls, really, but it was my Butterfree that did all the heavy work. I just helped guide her along." "Well, either way, Soli," Brock began. "Misty's right. You did earn that ribbon and I was really glad to finally get to see you perform." The red, almost pink-haired woman smiled at her childhood friend. "Thanks, Brock, I'm glad you could see it too. And all of you." She gestured kindly at the four of them. "It's great to see you and I'm so happy you could make it." Ash smiled at her and spoke himself finally, "We didn't wanna miss it, Soledad, and I'm glad we didn't. I've never seen a Pokémon contest like this before, and after watching you and all the other coordinators perform, I've got a lot of respect for what you do." Pikachu chimed in from his shoulder, "Pikachu pie." Soledad placed her hands on her hips and gave an eye smile before leaning in to scratch Pikachu behind the ears. I'm glad it didn't disappoint, thanks Ash. And you too Pikachu. After she finished scratching Pikachu, she stepped back and asked curiously, so how have you all been? Before anyone could respond, Ash's stomach suddenly growled, causing him to chuckle sheepishly while his friends rolled their eyes and shook their heads. Soledad merely laughed though and offered, how about we go eat at this nice little place I know of in the city that I always go to when I come through this way while we catch up. Getting no complaints from anyone, the five of them left the contest hall and waited out near the road for one of the buses ferrying people back to the city to arrive. When one did, they boarded it and in no time at all, they were back in the heart of Saffron City. Getting off at one of the bus stops while making small talk, they headed downtown and went to a small cafe located on a street corner that sold hot beverages, pastries, soups and sandwiches. Finding a table near one of the windows after ordering their individual things, the group of five sat down and began catching up on everything that had transpired since they parted at the Butterfree Cliffs. While telling their stories, Soledad found herself in a state of amazement at the incredible, dangerous misadventures they took part in at Lavender Town, and when they finally got to everything that had happened up to the current day of the contest, she just shook her head and took a sip of the hot green tea she had ordered. Saying you four have some crazy adventures would be a definite understatement. I'm just glad each of you are safe though, that's all that matters. She took another sip and then asked simply, so what's your next move while here in the city? Ash was the one who answered her as he leaned back in his chair across from Soledad. Well, tonight me and Giselle are going out to celebrate her late birthday, just us, and then tomorrow we're heading out to the Saffron City Pokémon gym so I can hopefully earn another badge. Soledad stopped mid-sip of her tea and lowered it as she just stared at Ash for a good few moments before finally replying, you're challenging Sabrina, the leader of the Saffron gym. She shook her head. Ash, I hope you know what you're getting yourself into. I've heard that gym leader is extremely cold and merciless. She doesn't take pity on any challengers and seems to have a habit of breaking them down mentally while she's battling them. At least from what I've heard. You'd better be prepared big time or else I have a feeling that you'll regret it. Ash shared a glance with Pikachu on his lap and then smiled while scratching his Pokémon behind the ears. All we can do is give it our all, nothing more. If we win and if we lose then we lose. It's not about that anyway, it's about building our bond together and also maturing as a trainer, in my case, and as Pokémon in theirs. Soledad smiled and tipped her tea to him. Well, I wish you luck, and since you all did it for me today, I would really like to come and see you battle tomorrow, Ash. To cheer you on and be a source of support if you wouldn't mind. The boy shook his head immediately. No way, not at all. We'd love to have you come along, right guys? Brock, Misty and Giselle all gave their own eager words of consent and assurance, which made Soledad laugh a little. Okay then, I guess we'll all be going tomorrow together. For the rest of the time after that, the five young Pokémon enthusiasts spent their meal talking, sharing stories and laughing amongst each other. Finding out different things about one another, cracking the occasional joke and just generally growing closer the longer the dinner drug on. By the time they all finally paid the bill and left the cafe, night had already begun to settle over the city as Saffron became aglow in the bright lights of street lamps, homes, restaurants, businesses of all kinds and even entertainment establishments like nightclubs and bars. Stepping out onto the still crowded streets that were now filling up with people that were about to enjoy the early evening and late night attractions the city had to offer as a way to unwind after a long day, Ash and the others gradually made their way back to the Pokémon Center on foot. Of where they had learned just recently that Soledad was also staying at, as she always did when she came through Saffron. The smart redhead having called ahead days in advance, not relying on luck like Ash and his friends had, to book a room for herself before the after-contest rush flooded the center. Upon arriving at the Pokémon Center and not finding it as crowded as they expected, most likely due to people still being out on the town, Soledad left her Butterfree with Nurse Joy before all five of them headed up to their individual rooms so they could clean up and shower off from the long day. Meeting back up in the lobby sometime later, Brock, Misty and Soledad decided to go out on the town together and see the sights while leaving Ash and Giselle to do the same, only on their own. A little gesture they were both happy for, as it gave the young, innocent couple a chance to be together alone so they could celebrate Giselle's birthday in a more one-on-one, romantic setting. A private outing which the two of them would come to greatly enjoy as they toured the city together, hand in hand, while taking in all of the many sights and attractions that Saffron had to offer in a leisurely, relaxed manner. Not doing anything too fancy or extravagant except for simply enjoying the alone time together that they now had in a new, lively city that held much to offer two young and adventurous souls with a thirst for discovery and new sights. In fact, the night turned out to be an enjoyable, pleasurable experience for everyone. Brock, Misty and Soledad finding their own fun and interesting things to get into while Ash and Giselle spent their romantic little evening together. Even Pikachu got to have fun as Soledad let him ride around on her shoulder in Ash's place so he could also see all of the many sights, attractions and spectacles of the large city. The little electric type having developed quite a fondness for the Pokémon coordinator that Misty and Brock became aware of and found to be quite humorous since the starter Pokémon of their shared friend seemed to like just about anybody that was female and treated him nicely. Like trainer like Pokémon, as they say. Altogether, it was a pleasant end to an equally as enjoyable day. A reprieve that would prove to have been much needed as the next day loomed on the horizon. No one, not even Ash, being able to guess what life-changing and shocking events were awaiting them all on the morrow. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning and Ash himself was sitting down in the Pokémon Center's lobby near one of the large glass windows at the front with two Pokéballs before him. A thoughtful, contemplative expression adorned his features as he tapped his fingers against his arms and just stared at his Pokeballs. After getting up at 7 and doing a light training session with his Pokémon that was meant to just be a warm-up for their upcoming gym battle and wasn't nearly as intense as it would normally be, he took a quick shower, had a bite to eat in the cafeteria after feeding his own Pokémon and then sat down in the lobby. A seat in which he hadn't moved from since. In fact, Pikachu himself looked just as serious as he sat beside of Ash and seemed to be in his own little world. Preparing himself mentally for the sure-to-be trying gym battle ahead. Hearing movement coming towards them, Ash looked over and saw Soledad coming their way. Already dressed up in her usual blue lacy top, white jean shorts with black designer belt,